Over 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth began a metamorphosis that it continues to go through today. Scientists theorize that the Earth began as a mass of condensed dust particles and gases. The dust particles condensed to form a huge rock-like mass. Gravitational forces caused the mass to condense further, creating tremendous pressure within the Earth's interior, which, along with radioactive energy, produced enough heat to melt the Earth's interior. Heavy materials such as iron, nickel, and other metals sank toward the Earth's core, while the lighter materials, such as silicates, rose to the surface and cooled, forming the beginning of the Earth's crust. The intense heat below the surface also caused other chemicals to rise to the surface, starting chemical reactions that would slowly form the atmosphere and the oceans that cover much of the Earth. In these oceans and hot springs that rose up from under the Earth's surface, the first forms of life would eventually appear. The Earth's crust and the layers of rock that form it are the main key to unlocking the history of our planet. Hidden in these layers of rock are the fossil remains of organisms that lived millions of years ago. The further down in the layers of rock the fossil is found, the older it is. The composition of the rock itself tells scientists whether it was once part of an ancient sea floor, a river of lava, or whether it was thrust to the surface by tremendous forces from deep within the Earth. The history of the Earth is divided into blocks of time, millions of years long. The longest block of time is the Precambrian, that started about 4.5 billion years ago and ended 560 million years ago. The nearly 4 billion years of Precambrian time represents about 85% of all geologic time. The first rocks created during Precambrian time were igneous rocks, formed and shaped by lava from the Earth's mantle that cooled to a solid mass, either on the Earth's surface or in cracks within the Earth's crust. Some molten rock was formed in the crust by the tremendous pressure of mountain building and then thrust to the surface, creating huge granite mountain ranges. Erosion and weathering, occurring over billions of years, have worn most of the Precambrian mountains down to a point nearly level with the surrounding terrain. These remnants of once great mountain ranges, called shields, can still be found on every continent today. Shields are the oldest rocks on Earth. In North America, most shields are found near major mountain ranges and throughout much of Canada. Within these shields, approximately 1/2 of the world's mineral deposits are found. During the intense movement created during the formation of Precambrian mountain ranges, molten rock rose through the Earth's crust and hardened among the rocks of the shield area. This molten rock contained iron, copper, nickel, gold, silver, and uranium. Today, the mining of iron ore still continues in the Mesabi Range of Minnesota, as does the search for gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Both of these areas lie on Precambrian shields. During much of Precambrian time, the Earth's surface was in fiery turmoil as lava flowed slowly from fissures in the Earth's crust or erupted violently from volcanoes. Such a landscape was hostile to the establishment of life. The little life that existed on Earth during Precambrian times either inhabited hot springs, like these, or ocean tide pools. The first living organisms on Earth were believed to be blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria. Blue-green algae is believed by scientists to have developed about 3.5 billion years ago in hot springs, like this one in Yellowstone National Park. Throughout Precambrian time, plant life continued to slowly evolve, though it remained confined to hot springs and ocean tide pools. It was over 2.5 billion years after the development of blue-green algae that the first animal life appeared in the Earth's oceans. These primitive invertebrates were ancestors to modern organisms like coral, marine worms, and jellyfish. But because these invertebrates had no skeletal structure, fossil records of them are scarce. The next big block of time was the Paleozoic era, which began about 560 million years ago and ended 240 million years ago. During the Paleozoic era, the continents as we know them today were not in their current locations. Scientists believe one large landmass called Pangaea existed. The majority of the land that would eventually become the North American continent lay around the equator. The waters of the oceans began to work on the coastal areas of this landmass, eroding them and forming large amounts of sediment, in which scientists have found large numbers of fossils. The Paleozoic era was divided into 6 periods: the Cambrian, Ordovician, Silurian, Carboniferous, Devonian, and Permian. Animal life during the Cambrian period had begun to develop hard shells or ectoskeletons, which leave very clear fossil remains in sedimentary rock. The most abundant of these shelled creatures, called trilobites, were relatives to modern crabs and scavenged the ocean bottoms. Other hard-shelled animals called brachiopods were also abundant. Brachiopods resembled modern clams. The Ordovician period is marked by a large increase in the number of types of organisms. By the end of the Ordovician period, the ancestors of nearly all modern hard-shelled sea life had developed, including the predecessors of gastropods like snails and modern echinoderms like starfish and sea cucumbers. The first actual clams appeared, and modern types of coral also began to develop in shallow water areas during the Ordovician period. Perhaps the most important development of the period was the appearance of the first vertebrates, which were primitive fish called ostracoderms. Fossils of these primitive fish were found in Colorado and Wyoming. 2 long sinking areas called geosynclines formed an important part of the geography of the land that would eventually become North America. The Appalachian geosyncline in the east and the Cordilleran geosyncline in the west were sinking areas that received large amounts of sediments from surrounding lands and were often flooded by the Earth's oceans. At its highest point, the flooding covered 70% of what is now the United States. The shallow seas created by the floods were good places for a large number of organisms to develop, mostly fish and marine life. The sediment that had settled at the bottom of the shallow ocean areas became exposed as the waters receded and eventually hardened to form sandstone and shale rocks containing fossils from millions of years of marine life. Monument Valley and much of what is now the desert Southwest was once a large land mass of sandstone, but years of erosion and wind have reshaped the rocks, leaving immense towers and some of the most unique rock formations on Earth. The Silurian period was characterized by the emergence of the first well-preserved and unmistakable land plants, which developed from green algae. It is hypothesized by scientists that cyclical flooding and drought on parts of the Earth led to the development of land plants. These first plants were the ancestors of modern ferns. Like modern ferns, these plants reproduced by means of small bodies called spores rather than by seeds. In the sea, the animals remained much the same as in the Ordovician period. However, there was the interesting addition of the sea scorpion, which grew up to 3 meters in length and was distantly related to the trilobite. Corals had now existed long enough to start forming large coral reefs. Just as land plants had evolved from green algae, land animals like spiders, millipedes, and scorpions evolved from marine crustaceans and took up residence on the land during the Silurian period. The shallow seas of the northern United States evaporated at the end of the Silurian period, leaving behind thick beds of rock salt and gypsum from central New York to Lake Michigan. The famous Lockport Dolomite, the cap rock of Niagara Falls, also formed during this period. The Devonian period is often referred to as the Age of Fishes. The earliest fish were jawless bottom dwellers with the heavy armored plates of a crustacean and limited swimming capabilities. These fish reached up to 9 meters in length. However, during the Devonian period, species known as lungfish appeared, capable of breathing air out of the water. Lungfish continue to exist today. Not long after the lungfish developed, another species with strong fins evolved, allowing them to crawl out of the water onto land. This fish gave rise to the first amphibians, large-headed crawling animals resembling giant salamanders. During the Devonian period, the land plants that developed during the Silurian period began to expand into a broader number of species. These were true spore-bearing ferns, seed-bearing ferns, and giant horsetails. Trees with scaly snakeskin-type bark developed, as well as trees called chordates, which resembled today's pine and fir trees. During the Carboniferous period, much of what is now the eastern United States was underwater. Freshwater swamps were plentiful, produced by the warm, rainy climate of the period. In these swamps, ferns and trees were extremely abundant. The dead trees and ferns in these swamps were transformed into peat, which in time turned into coal. Today, these deposits form the rich coal fields of Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, Indiana, and Illinois. When the ocean flooded these swamps, no coal was formed. Rather, deposits of mud, sand, and lime developed. In time, these deposits became the layers of sandstone, shale, and limestone that now separate coal beds. Insect life flourished in this warm, humid climate, with huge relatives of the modern dragonfly reaching bird-like sizes, and the ancestors of the common housefly also appeared for the first time. Cockroaches were so abundant at this time that some scientists referred to it as the age of cockroaches. Also during the Carboniferous period, the first reptiles, which looked much like modern lizards, appeared. The final period of the Paleozoic era was the Permian period. During much of the Permian period, a dry desert climate evaporated most of the inland seas of what was to become the United States. These evaporating seas left behind beds of ocean minerals like rock salt and gypsum that run through Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. During the Permian period, reptiles and insects made the greatest advances. By the end of the period, there were reptiles resembling modern alligators, and wasps and beetles had developed. By the end of the Permian period, the scale trees, seed ferns, and chordates that had populated the swamp forests became nearly extinct due to dry conditions, but cone-bearing seed trees, almost exactly like modern conifers, developed. Throughout the Paleozoic era, Geologic forces worked to create the Appalachian Mountains, while volcanism built small mountain areas in the United States and Mexico. The Mesozoic era began 230 million years ago and ended 65 million years ago. This span of 165 million years is the second shortest along the geologic timeline. This is a time period that began with intense movement and restructuring of the Earth's surface. In the early Mesozoic era, the modern continents were still part of the single supercontinent of Pangaea. Its total land area was about that of all the continents today combined. Starting about 180 million years ago, faulting and igneous activity in Europe, North America, South America, and Africa split Pangaea into two parts. The northern part, containing the future continents of North America and Eurasia, is referred to as Laurasia. The southern part, with the remainder of the continents, is called Gondwana. The North Atlantic and Indian Oceans had both formed. By the end of the Mesozoic era, the continents had nearly taken on their modern shapes. The geologic forces that were moving the continents to their present positions were also forming mountains. The Sierra Nevada Mountains of California and the Rocky Mountains were formed during the Mesozoic era. While the land itself was going through huge changes during the Mesozoic period, plant and animal life were also changing rapidly. The Mesozoic era was divided into three periods: the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. The first period of the Mesozoic era, the Triassic, witnessed the development of large numbers of new animal species. Among the reptiles, the first turtles, crocodiles, and dinosaurs appeared. Dinosaurs would become larger and more abundant during the Jurassic period. Very small primitive mammals also appeared for the first time, but wouldn't become important until nearly 150 million years later, after dinosaurs had become extinct. In the Triassic oceans, many types of fish, which resembled modern species, developed. New species also continued to develop among insects. In the plant kingdom, gymnosperms, with their naked, fruitless seeds, continued to develop and become more abundant. The gymnosperms included conifers, like pine trees, various types of cycads, and ginkgos, with their unusually shaped and broader leaves. The Jurassic period of the Mesozoic era marked the domination of the Earth by dinosaurs. The climate on land at this time was dry and warm, presumably perfect for these cold-blooded giants. Dinosaurs were either flesh-eaters, called carnivores, or plant-eaters, known as herbivores. The most famous of the meat-eaters, Tyrannosaurus rex, didn't make its appearance until the Cretaceous period. Fully grown, T-Rex was about 15 meters long and weighed many metric tons. It stood several meters high in its hind legs and walked with its tail in the air as a counterbalance to its large body and head. Its teeth were 15 centimeters long and razor sharp. The largest of the plant-eaters was the Brachiosaurus, weighed about 45 metric tons. But not all dinosaurs were giants. The smallest adult dinosaurs were only a few centimeters long. Another important development of the Jurassic period was the appearance of the first true bird, called Archaeopteryx. The Archaeopteryx evolved from reptiles, and like them, had teeth and laid eggs, but had developed wings, feathers, and other structures necessary for efficient flight. Insects that metamorphize from one form to another, like moths and butterflies, came into existence at about this time, as did grasshoppers and termites. Also during the Jurassic period, reptiles that looked like swordfish or huge snakes invaded the sea. Plant life made its greatest change during the Cretaceous period, when many of the flowering plants of today made their first appearances. Chief among these were deciduous trees that developed rapidly and crowded the forests. The sequoia, ancestor of California's giant redwoods, appeared during the Cretaceous period. The Cretaceous period marked the end of a time of rapid growth and expansion, and coincided with the widespread extinction of many plants and animals of the Mesozoic era. All of the dinosaurs mysteriously vanished, along with the flying and swimming reptiles, along with many marine turtles, crocodiles, lizards, and many other species. Many scientists believe that over 50% of the plant and animal groups on Earth vanished at the end of the Cretaceous period. Many reasons have been given for this mass extinction. These include drastic climate changes, the rise of mammals as a dominant life form, and worldwide disease. Presently, a new theory has been proposed that a meteor or asteroid hit the Earth, causing a chain reaction that led to the extinction of the dinosaurs. The theory developed with the discovery of rocks in the Earth's crust at the boundary between Mesozoic time and Cenozoic time, which contained enormous amounts of the element iridium, which is missing from any other rocks found in the Earth's crust. Iridium does, however, exist in great abundance in rocks of extraterrestrial origin, like meteorites. It is assumed that a meteorite or asteroid hit the Earth, sending great clouds of dust into the air, blocking out sunlight for several years. Land plants and plankton died because they now lacked sunlight needed to live and grow. Organisms like the dinosaurs that ate these plants eventually died of starvation. The smaller mammals were able to survive due to their lower energy requirements and ability to adapt to environmental changes. The Cenozoic era began 63 million years ago and continues through today. With the dinosaurs gone and plant life depleted, the Cenozoic era began with North America looking much the way it does today. Both the Appalachian and Rocky Mountains were worn down and raised again in this era. The Colorado Plateau was raised several times. During its last uplift, the Colorado River carved out the spectacular beauty of the Grand Canyon. Volcanism was also active during this period. Lava flows built up the Columbian Plateau in what is now Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and California. Erupting volcanoes studded the landscape from the Cascade Mountains to the southwest. In the Yellowstone National Park area, lava and ash covered whole forests. Mountain building was active worldwide as the Himalayas, the Alps, and the Andes were developed and raised higher in late Cenozoic time. Although these ranges represent millions of years of formation, they are relatively new geologically, with sharp cliffs and pointed peaks not typical of ranges which have been worn by years of erosion and weathering. The Cenozoic era began with warm and humid climates, but by mid-era, temperatures began to fall. Ice sheets began to form in northern Europe, Siberia, Greenland, and Antarctica. Alpine glaciers formed in most of the world's high mountains. Altogether, about 1/4 of all land was covered by ice at that time. As global temperatures dropped, tropical plants like palms and ferns, which had grown as far north as what is now the northern United States, began to die off in all areas except those very close to the equator. In California and Oregon, the giant sequoia of the Pacific coast and the Sierra Nevada continued to survive. Where the tropical plants died, grass and grasslands developed, bringing the emergence of cow, sheep, goat, and horse-like animals. Some grasses turned to grains, including wheat, corn, oats, and rice. In the water, invertebrates like those of today existed in the cool oceans. Sharks and rays were also abundant. Some sharks were nearly 20 meters long. On land, insects thrived, and a wide array of species developed. Amphibians such as frogs, toads, and salamanders were about as common as they are now. Reptiles such as turtles, lizards, snakes, and crocodiles resembled those of today. Also midway through the Cenozoic era, the rapid development of mammals began. Mammals had started as small, rodent-like creatures. The first horse was approximately the size of a modern cat. Among the newest mammals were those that could live in the seas. They were the ancestors of whales and porpoises. Other mammals could fly, like the modern bat. As time progressed, the mammals gradually grew larger. Camels, horses, rhinoceroses, pigs, dogs, and cats became much larger species. The grasslands of North America provided a thriving climate for grazing animals, and many grew to enormous sizes. Some camels grew to the size of giraffes. Horses spread to Asia as they traveled across the land bridge from Alaska to Siberia. Monkeys mysteriously died out in Northern America, but continued to develop into apes in Asia and Europe. The Ice Age in full effect, the North American elephants reached their peak and died out. These included the mastodons, the imperial mammoths, and the woolly mammoths. Great herds of horses, camels, and bison lived in North America at this time, but horses and camels became extinct in North America about 12,000 years ago. Eventually, Spanish explorers returned the horse to American soil. It is believed by some scientists that the people living in North America at the time caused mass extinctions of these animals through hunting. The end of the Ice Age occurred only 11,000 years ago, as the last of the great ice sheets melted away. We as humans have not been part of Earth's history for very long. The history of the Earth is full of examples of species that couldn't adapt to changes in the environment and became extinct. One of the reasons for the success of the human species is its adaptability. But it is important to remember we are not immune to changing environmental forces. We must not allow ourselves, through our arrogance, to create environmental changes that will sow the seeds of our own destruction.